Everybody, you normally are accustomed to 2 screens. We got the 3 because we got Zach from Locked On Auburn doing a crossover, talking about this rivalry game. Y'all better get excited because Georgia going to put, or will they? Zach's going to tell us next.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special crossover episode, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Auburn. This episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of Locked On Podcast. More on them in a moment. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for being an everydayer. Thanks for making us your first listen. Thank you for making both of our shows so wildly successful as they are. We do not deserve it, but you guys are the best. Zach, how are you feeling today? Other than the fact that you have to talk about the Auburn-Georgia game coming up on Saturday, other than that, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think you feel as good as you can about a 2-3 football team going into Athens. First time Auburn's leaving Jordan-Hare Stadium, which is kind of wild this season.
That is wild.
You know, this is an Auburn team that's like, I think they're better than their record, but also like you are who your record is at this point. They've been able to move the football. It's like you blink and they turn the football over and they find ways to just like show a lack of composure. So like, are they capable of doing something and making it interesting on Saturday? Sure. Are they going to? I don't know, guys. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the feeling we're coming away with. The spectrum of this game, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 35-6 by the time we're all said and done. I also wouldn't be surprised, as Daniel has said, if it's 28-21 and we're going down fourth quarter drive to stop them. Either one of these is not outside the realm of possibility. I think the question, you brought it up, and this has been fascinating for us to watch. And as Georgia fans, we don't know the answer to this, but we're seeing wild speculation. Is the turnover machine that is Auburn football right now, is this a Hugh problem, or a Hugh can't find the quarterback problem, or is this a Thorne problem? Where is that?
Well, the turnovers happened when Peyton Thorne didn't start against Arkansas. Right. You know, Hank Brown went in there, and then, you know, there have been fumbles by the running backs too, and that's not a scheme thing. So, like, I think it's a little bit of everything, which makes it way worse, right? Because you can't just point to one thing. I think a lot of it is Thorne, but I think a lot of it is also just everything not being on the same page. But Auburn's offense, once again, like they've been able to move the football. Oklahoma has a good defense. Auburn put up 480 yards. They just find ways to step on their own foot and to not be able to get out of their own way. I mean, obviously the pick six was a big deal. You go to the goal line and Hugh Freeze calls the Sam Jackson Wildcat play when Peyton Thorne's actually a pretty decent runner, especially around the end zone. Like, why are you doing stuff like that? So I think a lot of this is self-inflicted stuff, guys. And it's so far into the year, it's hard to see it being drastically different, especially when you hit the road for the first time this season.
Yeah. Are we done, do you think, with the Hank Brown experiment so far, or do you think we're going to see more of him as the season goes on? I wouldn't say, to your point, that Peyton Thorne played terribly poorly against Oklahoma, but he obviously did literally hand the game to the Sooners at the end. Like, are we going to see it in Athens on Saturday? Is probably a terrible time to give Hank Brown a start if you care about his mental well-being at all. But are we going to keep seeing him, or are we just going to ride with Peyton Thorne?
I mean, I think Peyton has to lose the job again, and I don't think what he did on Saturday against Oklahoma warrants him losing the job. So I think it is Peyton Thorne's job until proven otherwise, which isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but Hugh Freeze and the staff believes that he gives you the best chance to win. So that's probably it. And once again, I think Auburn is going to be able to move the ball at times on Saturday. It's just at some point, is there good? And I said this going to the Oklahoma game. Like I actually think it's going to be close for a little bit. I mean, I think Georgia's going to win by multiple scores when it's all said and done, but I do think this game will be interesting, maybe till halftime or so. And then I think Auburn's going to do some weird self-inflicted thing whether it's a pick, whether it's a fumble, whether it's a weird call in a crucial situation in the game where you go 3 and out and you need to sustain a drive and they do something silly. I think Auburn's going to kind of say, all right, yeah, here's the game, Georgia. That's what I think is going to happen on Saturday.
So what you're saying is, Zach, that you've watched Georgia football as well as Auburn football this year. So you know that Georgia just comes out and absolutely looks awful in the first half. Like that's our move. Yeah. Like that's what we do. We come out and are very pedestrian at the beginning of games, putting it mildly, sometimes to the tune of losing 28-7 or 28-3 or whatever.
Right. Why is Georgia starting so slow? I mean, what we've seen against Kentucky, right? And then obviously Alabama. The one time I need y'all to win, y'all just can't get it done. What's up with that?
Yeah. Even the Clemson game. I mean, 6 points in the first, 6-0 at halftime against Clemson to start the year.
Sure.
The defense hasn't been starting slow except against Alabama. The defense looked awful. Yeah. And Kirby said in the post-game presser, he got out-coached in that game. Kalen had a better game plan than he did. And it's a tough look when you're a Georgia fan. You think you have the best coach in college football, and you think there's not even You think there's not even an argument to be made that he's not the best coach in college football. Yeah, and then Kalen DeBoer comes out and absolutely coaches circles around you in that script to open that game for Alabama, and you got guys taking the wrong angles. You got guys completely fooled. And so that was new on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you would say is the pinpointed reason, Clint, for this, but I think we've seen such a variety of things go wrong for this Georgia offense. There have been times like the Kentucky game when the offensive line just came out and looked like they couldn't block anybody. Looked like they weren't doing anything, which, to be fair, a week later or 2 weeks later, Kentucky's defensive front turns out is pretty good. Ole Miss couldn't block them either. Kentucky has a really solid defensive front.
Which that was funny, right? We can all agree. Kentucky going into Oxford and winning. That's
really
funny.
That's funny.
Okay.
We laughed.
We did laugh. Common ground there. Yeah.
We did laugh at that. I think everyone watching this show right now laughed at that. So the offensive lines played poorly at times, but on Saturday against Alabama, I thought the offensive line actually played well. Carson Beck laid an egg on Saturday. There have been drops. Yeah. There have been receivers not able to get open. And for whatever reason, the halftime adjustments by Mike Bobo this year have been really good. The opening game scripts by Mike Bobo this year have not been good at all.
Except for the Alabama game. He scripted that opening series was perfect, save an Arian Smith drop. I'm going to go on record. Arian Smith makes that catch. The game is completely different. Arian Smith gets that check down screen and he realizes the screen, it's not an interception. The game changes right there. So I think we've seen Bobo, because this is what Kirby went up to Kentucky and he was fine winning a 3-point game. Like every single year we joke about it. He's fine winning those against Stoops. I think he needs to let the regulator off just a bit. And we saw it in the Alabama. He did so, and we just couldn't execute. So that's what was happening there. We're going to come back after this. We might let Zach ask us a question or two, see what he thinks about this defense, this offense for us. I don't know. Who knows? We're going to keep him over there. But first, these. These are, in fact, FanDuel. We love FanDuel. You should love FanDuel. They're the official sports book of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Bulldogs. We love them so much. Get over there right now. Right now, you can go ahead and get on the action. Daniel gave you a lock that are you still feeling good, Daniel, about your lock for USC?
Auburn?
Is that one still feeling good to you?
Sorry. Yeah. My lock in this game is Auburn team total under 14. Like that's my lock.
You're still feeling good about that one as well.
Yeah. You can get it on FanDuel right now. Auburn team total under 14. I think a bounce back game for this Georgia defense.
I think you're exactly right. NFL fans, you can start the season with
Auburn plus 24.5, by the way. I think that's my play. And then just the overall the under as well. I'm taking both of those.
Okay. You can get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more at the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, Zach, we give you the floor. We cede it to the representative down over there. You can ask us whatever you want about this Georgia team, and we'll be happy to answer.
Sure. So I guess from the Auburn perspective, there's two narratives that Auburn fans are throwing around all over the place. And I think the truth is probably it's somewhere in the middle, but I want to hear y'all's thoughts on it. One is Georgia loses a regular season game for the first time in years. Mm-hmm. How do they respond? Are they going to be, you know, is this going to be a thing where they get in their own head or whatever? Not buying that one. The other that a lot of Auburn fans are saying is they're going to be ticked off and Auburn's going to just be the next victim because they're going to snap back and Kirby's going to get them and they're going to kind of look like they have over the last 2 seasons. The truth, probably somewhere in the middle, but if you guys had to pick one extreme or the other, what are you going with?
Yeah, I would choose the extreme that's not ticked off, but confidence. I think that you saw Kirby at the end of the game. If I was to change the word, but it's the same side of the spectrum.
I get it.
It's confidence knowing we went toe-to-toe with what I consider the best team in college football right now, Alabama, at home, had them on the ropes. We could be those guys. How about we go be those guys for every minute of the game instead of for 30 or 27 minutes of the game? That might be good. That might be great. We can do that. So I don't think it's going to be in their heads. That is not the case. I saw leadership rise up. But the weird thing for me, and rivalry game and a familiar opponent, those two things terrify me every single time. If this game was in Jordan-Hare, I'd be doubly. I hate that stadium with all of my passion. Sure. I'd be doubly. I might start saying it's probably the needle in the other direction, because to go on the road in Tuscaloosa, lose, then to go on the road again and have to get back up for it. But I think coming at home, this is a perfect spot, I think, in the calendar for where Georgia gets Auburn.
True.
I think it's going to be the confident team is what I think. Daniel, am I wrong on that?
Yeah, no, we did see a lot of weirdly smiley Kirby Smart after that Alabama game, which was none of the Georgia fans were.
It was kind of weird watching that. Yeah.
Yeah. None of the Georgia fans were smiling. We had all had our hearts ripped out multiple times. We watched the first quarter and then we watched the fourth quarter, and in 2 totally different ways, we died inside each time.
Sure.
But Kirby seemed to be pretty pleased with all things considered, like how that game turned out. And I do think what you saw, I said this earlier in the week on our show, but I think the one thing that I really did learn on Saturday is that while I'm not sure if Georgia's a national championship caliber team, on Saturday, what I learned about Georgia is that they will reach whatever ceiling they have. They have the mental makeup, the resiliency, the toughness, the intangibles, whatever you want to call it. And so whatever that first point was that you brought up, like, I don't see that at all, because Georgia had a chance to lay down and die. Like, that window has already closed. Like, they had a moment where they could pack it in and get in their own head and start to feel all the feelings. And it was in the locker room in Bryant-Denny on Saturday. And they did the exact opposite. They came out and they played great. Carson Beck continued to throw it and throw it and throw it, despite having his absolute worst game of his career. And so, again, I don't know what that means for Saturday. I think Georgia's a better football team than Auburn, so I think it's going to mean a win for Georgia. Down the road, I don't necessarily know that it means Georgia goes 11-1 and wins the SEC championship game against Alabama and wins the national championship. I don't know. Georgia might not be good enough to do that, but I do know that they're not going to do that thing that you just said. Like, that is what I feel the most confident in.
Sure. And I think I agree with both of y'all. What's the worst case scenario on Saturday from the Georgia point of view? Like, what does Auburn need to do to make the worst case scenario for Georgia happen? Because, we can all say what we want about Hugh Freeze and what he's done in the year and a half that he's been at Auburn. But against Georgia and Alabama last year, like, those were incredible game plans. A way inferior roster, and it comes down to, the final drives or the final play in those games. Like, they've been able to put plans together. Those are both at home. Obviously, I think it being in Athens is going to be different. But what's the worst case scenario for Georgia? What does Auburn need to do to make that happen?
Well, I think one thing that we do know about Hugh Freeze is that it's not his fault. Like, that's something we can definitively say. It's not his fault. We all know that.
No. Sure.
So I think if you take the scoreboard out of it, because we all know what worst case scenario is in terms of the scoreboard, right? Like, Georgia loses at home to Auburn. Slightly less worse than that is Georgia barely beats Auburn, and then so on and so forth. So we're going to take the scoreboard out of it.
Thanks, Daniel. That's great.
I think it's the insight that you get when you tune into Locked On. You know what I'm saying? Like you get the real breakdown here. Like this is it.
I don't think anybody's more prepared for this game than the folks that are tuning into this show right now.
Yeah,
because of that.
Okay, so if you take that off the table, I think worst case scenario for Georgia is a bunch of missed tackles and Jarquez Hunter and these Auburn wideouts catching little short stuff, you know, and breaking 2 tackles and running for 20 yards before a safety runs them out of bounds.
Got it.
In the first half, that's what we saw against Alabama. That was,
I would assume, actually like using Jarquez Hunter in the offense, which
you would want to hand him the ball. You would want to give him the ball if you were gonna.
I'm gonna get there, Zach.
That's my next question. Situations, like why would you want to do that? Why would you do that?
I don't know. It's not Hugh's fault. That's what we know. But if Georgia can't shore up that's the very un-Georgia thing that we saw in the first half on Saturday. They took terrible angles at Milroe, and they could not get guys on the ground. And it wasn't just Milroe that they couldn't get on the ground. There was a lot of guys that there were tackles missed in the front 7. There were tackles missed in the secondary. And that is a very uncharacteristic, un-Kirby Smart type thing. And so that would be worst case scenario if that doesn't get fixed at home against Auburn. One, because I think it would lead to some Auburn points, whereas otherwise I think you're going to see a lot of short stuff from Auburn. And then if it's an immediate tackle, then Georgia doesn't have to worry about it. It's missed tackles that's where Auburn's offense might come from. And 2, just because it's going to be an indicator to me of future things. I don't know. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, well, real quick, Clint, if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to that. Because you referred to Auburn needing to do some short stuff, which I assume is a credit to the Georgia pass rush. I'm assuming, but that's not the way this Auburn offense is operated. I mean, they are chunk plays. I think they're like top 5 in the country in explosive plays. I mean, this is a team that's been able to kind of pull off, these deep plays. It's just they turn it over the next drive in some of these games. But they've been able to move the football. Like if they're able to kind of do some of this and take care of the football, I think this does get interesting. Are they going to be able to do that? I'm not predicting that to happen, but like that, we're talking about worst case scenario for Georgia, what Auburn needs to do to pull this off. Auburn fans kind of want them to dink and dunk it a little bit more. Like we've kind of been asking for a little bit of that. So I'm curious to see what they do.
Yeah, I think I am just much more confident in the Georgia secondary and the Georgia pass rush, as you said, than
makes sense. Yeah,
I am in Georgia's ability to tackle on the perimeter right now. And so
I think that's the biggest thing.
The rest of
tackling on the perimeter is the question, right? We saw that against Alabama. They started failing at that. They couldn't get it. Was only at the second half they saw. So when we say get out to the outside, it's basically replicating what Georgia was unable to do against Alabama. And this is going to sound weird because I don't know if this name is still like taboo in Auburn circles, but this Gus Bus type thing where it's chunk plays, I see that. I see Thorne hucking it up there to what I consider a young, talented wide receiver room. And then in spots, the thing that would change if all of a sudden Hugh did use Hunter in appropriate situations.
What?
Holy geez, this is now we're talking about an offense that is explosive.
Red zone?
And you get in the red zone and you get in short, and all of a sudden you have a running game to complement those chunk plays. That's a recipe that I don't care what defense you have. You can, it doesn't matter. That will beat anybody. And so that's worst case scenario. I think on the other end, I'm going to be curious to come back after this to ask about the defense for Auburn, because I have a game plan I think Auburn will utilize, and you're going to tell me if I'm just crazy or if I'm onto something. So come back to this for the third segment.
I disagree already.
Yeah, but first these. I like it when we disagree without knowing. That's what sports fandom's all about. I hate you without knowing you just because.
Right. We just described Twitter. And one.
The most devastating part of the Auburn-Georgia rivalry is when I realized I liked both of you. I'm like, dang.
Yeah, that is tough. It is a tough thing.
Before we get to this, do you remember the very first interaction our fans had with you? We've told this story multiple times, and it's one of our favorite things to get back and talk about this. Do you remember the very first interaction our fans had with you on the first crossover? What subject got me in all sorts of a heat with?
This would have been like 5 years ago, right?
Okay.
4 or 5 years ago?
Yes, it would have been 2017.
2017. The question that you asked was, Is Stetson Bennett really going to come in to Jordan? And is he really going to
2020?
Is he really going to do something?
I do remember this.
And I said with a straight face, absolutely he will.
Yeah.
And I got roasted, and Auburn fans roasted me. So it's one of our favorite stories to tell as we're gearing up for Auburn.
No, y'all got the last laugh on that one. That's for sure.
This is what I brought. Okay, here's my question to you. Here's what I think Auburn will do, but you tell me if they have the personnel or the defensive mentality for this. I think the way to beat Georgia is to take away the run a la Kentucky and Alabama by absolutely just sending the house on blitzes and then going second. So run blitz secondary, get man up coverage, cover the wide receiver, because this just in Georgia, we believe has good, not great receivers. We have good, competent guys, not great. And so 0 man up, send the house, get some 7-man fronts going on. Is that something Auburn wants to do, has done? Am I crazy for thinking that they might do that?
Yeah, no, I don't think you're crazy. I don't think you're crazy. So DJ Durkin, the DC, he loves 3-man fronts, which I don't love, but it's working so far. Something about Auburn's defense that I think is a little misleading is they haven't allowed these massive amounts of yards. And in these close games, they're having to like compensate for the offense turning it over so many times. Like, so they're actually even better than what the numbers say, which I do think is intriguing. Yeah, that wouldn't shock me. I think if you look at Georgia, that's probably what they'll do. And then when you look at the matchups on the outside, I love Auburn's corners, but they are young. And sometimes they do things that freshmen and true sophomores do. So Jay Crawford got his first like start in his first, full game. He's a true freshman, but he looked really good against Oklahoma. They didn't throw to him. So it's like, does it expose him a little bit if he's thrown to? We'll see. And the other one's Canley, who had a miss. He missed big on a few plays against Oklahoma, but he's capable. He's certainly capable of playing at a high elite SEC level. So, I mean, do you want to rely on a true freshman and a true sophomore with that game plan? That's the question.
Yeah, I think fascinating question. I would say no, but Daniel, what do you?
Me too.
Well, I do think, and you can't. You got to kind of pick your poison, like, right? And it all kind of comes down to like, who do you think Carson Beck really is? And before last week, there was only one answer to that question, right? Like Carson Beck was kind of universally thought to be this like elite processor, sees the field really well, got a great arm, first round draft pick. Like everybody talks about Carson Beck the same way. Last week, you saw a couple of the interceptions Clint mentioned earlier, at least one, not his fault, but certainly like that throw in the end zone, a couple of the throws that he made and we've seen it. It's not, he hadn't turned it over 4 times, but he's made some of those throws this whole year that you might not have noticed if you're not a Georgia fan, you're not paying attention because they haven't necessarily come back to bite Georgia in the same way. Carson Beck has not been elite as a quarterback this year. And so the question is, if you have a quarterback that maybe is in his head a little bit, that's struggling a little bit, that's struggling to see the field a little bit, are you better off playing coverage and not giving him any windows and trying to rattle him that way? Or are you better off trying to light him up and risking exposing those young corners and trying to rattle him and get in his head that way? I think if I'm a Georgia fan, I actually want Auburn to do what Clint said. I would rather create some one-on-ones and, based on what you said, Zach, because I think that makes the game simpler for Carson Beck, and it allows him to just stand back there and throw it. And while Georgia's receivers are not elite, and I was at halftime, I was ready to completely write them off as being trash. They showed me in the second half against Alabama that they can create separation. They can get open. They can run routes. They can fool defenders. Yeah. They can get behind a safety. And if Carson Beck is just standing back there and throwing it, he's still a really good quarterback.
Yeah, that's the tale of two halves. The first half, Alabama didn't change up their game plan much. They did blitz. They brought a lot of pressure. It rattled Carson first half. Second half, the offensive line and Carson Beck were in sync more. Receivers got open more, and it changed. It flipped. So the question is, Alabama did that with a couple of very young corners as well. Their defensive backs are not mature. They're young guys that had to prove themselves. They proved in the first half to do well. Will Auburn chance and trust? That's the big question going forward. And who knows? Who's to say? But it is interesting. I think for Georgia, there's going to be a need to run the ball. So even if that's why I said run fronts, then to secondary, get those blitzes going to get to Carson Beck. So that's why I said 7-man fronts. Zach, any other questions? Any other parting things? Give me your prediction for the game. You said at the beginning, hey, maybe a couple scores, but the thing's all said and done, close first half. What's your prediction for this game?
I'll go 31-13.
Okay. Look, this man over here, Daniel, I said 30-10 to begin the season or to begin the week. I'm sticking with that.
Yeah, I'm going to go
You made a face when I said Auburn plus 24.5. Why'd you do that then?
No.
I was commenting on him.
Yeah, Clint backed himself into a corner earlier in the week after the Alabama game. Yeah, after the Alabama game, Clint said, whatever the number is, you have to lay it with Georgia next week against Auburn. So then the number came out 24.5, and it's a
pretty big number.
It's a ridiculous number, if I'm being honest. I'm with you. I like the under, the Auburn team total under, the total, like the full game under. Yeah, so I got something in the neighborhood of like 28-10 in this game as well. Zach, any last thoughts for the people? Any last things to share as we get out of here?
No, like I said, I think Auburn is in it at halftime, and then I think somewhere through mid third quarter, I think Georgia either Auburn does something and gives it away, or Georgia makes a play, and then after that, I think it'll be all Georgia. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I actually see it. Maybe this is just hopeful thinking, but I actually see it kind of going the opposite. I see Georgia for the first time actually coming out, establishing something, using the home crowd, using the momentum, and then maybe relaxing a little bit when they've got, when the game's 21-3 in the third quarter, then maybe you see Auburn move the ball and drive. Either way, it's the Deep South oldest rivalry. It's always fun when Georgia and Auburn play against each other, and wild things have happened in this game. Like you said, last year Peyton Thorne rushed for 294 yards or something like that. That's unofficial stats. But so who knows what will happen? Who knows what Hugh will have cooked up, how Kirby will respond. Right. He is Zach, Locked On Auburn. Make sure you're following him. If you're a Georgia fan, at least go and subscribe to his show just for the week, just so you can get a full taste of everything that's happening around the Auburn program. And Zach, good to talk to you as always, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, talk to y'all soon.
See ya.